Shalom, shalom, shalom to everyone. This is Rabbi Moshe Utero. Hopefully you had a wonderful Seder there, Passover, Pesach. We did two. We want to welcome you this afternoon to a shiur on Sefer Haikkarim. We're in chapter 21, book number 2. So we're going to keep on pushing forward towards with the completion, continuance of the completion of Sefer Haikkarim, which is a very large book, but it's a book that's worthwhile learning. And so I want to continue with the series, and we're not going to be talking about the fourth dogma, which has to be with there is no defect in God. And this is something that Rabbi Albo, Joseph Albo, begins to delve into and states the following. We will now explain the fourth dogma mentioned above, that God is free from defects. If we reflect very carefully and deeply upon the matter of attributes, we shall find that God must necessarily be characterized by many attributes and not merely from the point of view of his acts alone. And for this reason that we mentioned in chapter 8 of this book, or it would be in the chapter 8 of the video, but from this point of view of himself, the affirmative and the negative always divide between them true and false, and in all modes of the predication, the necessary, impossible, and the possible. Taking the possible mode as an instant, it is clearly that we can not escape this disjunction that God is either wise or not wise, possessing powers or not possessing powers, having a will or not having a will. But it cannot be true that God is not wise or does not possess power, for there cannot be any defect in God. It follows, therefore, that the other parts of the disjunction is true, namely that he is wise, possesses power, has will, is kind, upright, and reliable. The same thing holds of all perfections, that he must have perfection because he cannot have defect. This is a necessary conclusion without regards to the acts which emanates from God, as when we say that he is living because life emanates from him, or he is wise because wisdom emanates from him, and so with the other attributes. No, he's living and wise because he cannot be dead or ignorant, because since perfection are of a different kind, knowledge being different from power, power different from life, life different from the will and from wisdom, it follows that he has many different attributes. Approaching the problem in this way, therefore, we come to the conclusion that God has many attributes, while from the discussion that we saw in the 10th chapter, and you'll see that also in the 10th chapter of the video, we concluded that he has no attributes except himself. The problem, therefore, is how God can have many attributes without introducing plurality in his essence. Our solution is this, says Rabbi Albo. The attributes ascribed to God are of two kinds. There is one class of attributes which we ascribe to him because he has a necessary existence and the cause of all existing things, and neither of which he can be conceived to be unless he and the attributes in question. Such attributes are one, eternal, perpetual, wise, having will, possessing power, and the other besides, which God must have in order to be the author of all existing things. There's also another class of attributes which we ascribe to him because we imagine that they can constitute the perfection or perfection. Thus we ascribe to him riches, because we imagine that the riches constitute perfection in God as they can constitute perfection in us, the opposite being a defect. We also ascribe bearing and seeing to God because they are perfection in us, though we can exercise these powers only by means of corporeal organs. Now, every attribute ascribed to any subject has in two aspects. One aspect is that of perfection inherent to the attributes. The other is the defect which supervenes as a result of the attribute. According to the attribute, so to speak, composed mentally of two elements, one being perfection and the other a defect. Thus, if we attribute wisdom to a subject, the attribute is itself a mark of perfection in the subject, but on the other hand, from the fact that it is acquired by the subject and accidental in him, thus the result is a defect in the subject, because the attribute is not essential in him, and thus induces plurality. Now, when we attribute wisdom to God, we do so only in a view to the perfection that is involved and not to the defect. The defect involved in perfection exists only if we view wisdom in relations to ourselves, who acquire it gradually through one conclusion after another, as if derived from its premises. It is therefore sometimes that it originates in us from a state of not being and is attributed and added our essence, but when we attribute the knowledge to God, we do not think that it's derived from the premises or as becoming into a being in him, as it comes into being in us. We rather think it is inherent in God's existence, or in God himself. In the same way as axiom exists in a man, requiring neither learning nor teaching, except that the knowledge is in God in a more perfect manner, which when we attribute wisdom to God, therefore, our purpose is to indicate that he has perfection without defect, though the only way we can conceive of attaining wisdom is that which in man acquires it. Similarly, we see concerning power, will, and other attributes that they are ascribed to God with a view that to perfection attaching to the attribute to question, and not with a view to defect. In this way we ascribe to him attributes of a second class, which also involves corporeal perceptions. Thus we attribute to him the sense of smell, which is a sensuous perception, as we read, and the Lord smelled the sweet savor. But we do not attribute it to God as being a corporeal perception, but with a view of perfection which involves, namely, that God accepts favorably the offering of a person who brings it with a worthy purpose. We do not think of God as deriving pleasure from the offering, which would be a defect. This is what the prophet means when he says, "For I spoke not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, concerning the burnt offerings or sacrifices. But this thing I commanded them, saying, Hearken to my voice." Here, we are told, the purpose of the institution of sacrifice was that the heart of the sinner may be humbled, so they may return to God and hearken to his voice, but not to give God sensuous satisfaction. God forbid, heaven forbid. The following passages makes it clear. "Do I eat the flesh of bulls and drink of blood of goats? Offer unto God the sacrifice of thanksgiving, and call upon me in the day of thy trouble." All of this to show that the purpose of the institutions of sacrifice was to direct our heart, or the heart of the sinner, to the worship of God and nothing else. For this reason, we do not attribute to him the sense of taste or the sense of touch, because they constitute a perfection in us as corporeal animals, and that they enable us to praise what is beneficial and avoid that which is injurious. There is no spiritual perfection involved in them, which we can attribute to God. Hearing is attributed to God in the expression, "Let thine ears be attentive," and so is sight. "Behold, the eye of the Lord is towards them that fear him." The eye of the Lord that runs to and fro from throughout the earth, the whole earth, because the people can imagine that there is a spiritual perfection in these senses. Therefore, they are attributed to God, though the taste and the touch are not. This shows that the attributes are ascribed to God by reason of perfection that is in them, and not by reason of the defect. Therefore, we say the attributes ascribed to God must be conceived as a unified in him. And though in us they are separate and distinct, we conceive them as a separate because we acquire them after the other. Similarly, we think of them as advantageous because we acquire them, not because because having them before. But in the case of God, we must conceive that for them as unified and not as acquired. Else, they would induce plurality in the essence, which is a defect. We have thus made it clear that the attributes are described to God with a view of perfection. They are involved in not defects, for God is free from defects. Of our fourth dogma, therefore, that God is free from defect, signifies that the attributes of imperfection, such as ignorance, poverty, sleep, fatigue, and so on, must be rejected, and also the attributes of perfection, which are ascribed to God, are conceived as being in Him. So far they are involved in perfection, but not so far as they involve the source of defect, such as plurality or change, which are defects in God, since He endures forever the same manner without any changes. This is the meaning of what the psalmist says when he says, O God, keep not thou silence, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. That is, since thou art not silent, either because of sleep or ignorance or fatigue, since these is no defect in thee, and thou art not subject to change, then wherefore looketh thou when thou deal treacherously, and holdeth thy peace when the wicked swallows up the man that is more righteous than he? Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. According to our explanation, those positive attributes which we cannot but attribute to God, like living, wise, possessing will, having power, and so on, must be conceived in a manner that not to necessitate a defect. That explanation deserves careful attention because it is true and correct, and has been adopted by the ancient and modern theological authorities. It is worthy of acceptance, and the reader or those watching is urged to follow. And here ends Rabbi Joseph Albo, chapter 21, which he delves into the defect, if there's any defect in God, and obviously he has argued that there is no defect in God, even those things that we may think are defect, in fact they are not. And so in chapter 22, we're going to see how it's impossible to ascribe to God any attributes, any essential accidental, which expresses God Himself, but only those which are expressive of His acts, and is explained in this chapter, in chapter 22, and also in chapter 9 of this book, which we already saw earlier. So stay tuned, continue the series, and our next video will be covering chapter 22 of Sefer Haikkarim. I want to thank you, and remember, to be part of the Ways of Israel, you can join our Ways of Israel group page. You can become a member, and where we send you a membership card or logos of your status, and be part of our growing organization worldwide. You can do so by joining right now, downloading the application, which is right here on this Ways of Israel group page, and fill it out, send it back to me, and we'll get you out a membership for only $100 a year. $100 a year will give you an annual membership. If you want to sign up for 5 years, just send $500. Less than that, you can do according to your budget. And if those levels are not satisfying to you, you can send whatever donation or tzedakah you can to help our organization continue to grow and be able to be a blessing to other communities that we're helping as well. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel. And remember, this week, Pesach continues to about the 13th of this coming week. And then we're still counting the Omer. Every day we're counting the Omer. And this way we learn to correct and rectify an aspect that perhaps we find ourselves defective. It's a way to make us a better person as we are counting the Omer. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you again tomorrow as we continue learning the Sefer Haikkarim, an incredible manual of the basics of Judaism. Shalom, shalom.